Good afternoon. Thank you for standing by and welcome to the Beneficial Electrification, a Utility Perspective. My name is Emmett Owens and I represent the Research Triangle Cleantech Cluster. I want to begin by thanking all of you for joining us. I know this conversation focused on beneficial electrification is an important topic for utilities, consumers, and organizations wishing to decrease their carbon footprint. I especially want to thank today's panelists for joining us. I know they will provide valuable insights into the broad topic of beneficial electrification and the potential impacts that will have on all of our lives. We'll let Dr. Mazzola provide a more formal introduction later in the program, but I just wanted to say thank you. Before we get too far in the event, I want to take care of a few housekeeping items related to this webinar. During today's event, we ask that attendees remain in listen-only mode, and as a heads up, we are recording this webinar. For those of you who are familiar with attending RTCC events in person, you know we enjoy facilitating connections among participants, and we encourage and hope each of you can make a valuable connection during this event. Those interested in virtual networking received an email from me yesterday afternoon and again this morning with the names and organizations of affiliation of those who are interested in participating in network. And so out of the respect for the presenters and other participants, we ask that you please privately message the individual you wish to connect with during using the chat function. And so as you can see on my slide, the chat feature is located at the top of your screen if you're looking in the GoToMeeting window. If you just click that icon, you'll be able to see the chat feature. When you click the icon, the chat box will be at the bottom. If you select the drop-down list, you'll be able to select who you'd like to chat with. And keep in mind that you can change the view within GoToMeeting by clicking the drop-down at the top middle of the screen as indicated by the arrow. We have reserved 15 minutes for Q&A towards the end of today's call. If you have any questions for the panelists during their presentation, you can submit questions in the general chat, and Dr. Mazzola and the panelists and I will keep an eye on it and see once we get to the Q&A period if we can answer that question. And so before I turn it over to Dr. Mazzola, endure a little Twitter infomercial about the Cleantech Cluster. I want to provide some context, additional information about who we are and what we do. We're a membership-driven nonprofit. We focus in these 4 vertical areas. We wouldn't be here without our members, so thank you so much if you are a member for your support. We really can't tell you how much we appreciate it. So RTC is also in the middle of a 3-year grant focused on developing a corridor between Raleigh and Charlotte. We're with our partner, the Jules Accelerator, which is based in Charlotte. And so we're excited about that. If you'd like more information, feel free to just ask after the event. And so I also want to encourage you to check out our YouTube page. That's where we're featuring this webinar after we're done and other webinars that we've been partnering on or produced in the past few months. So you can see the URL down there at the bottom of this slide, www.researchtrianglecleantech.org/YouTube. So we'll hope you'll be able to join us and check some of those content out. I now want to turn it over today to our moderator, Dr. Mike Mazzola, with the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and their Energy Production and Infrastructure Center, which is also known as EPIC. So Dr. Mazzola, show is yours.
Thank you, Emmett, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce, and if you could just stick on the first one there, thank you, Emmett.
Sorry about that.
Our panelists, and all credit to the Research Triangle Cleantech Cluster for recruiting our panelists, Jim Musilek and Lisa Poger. Jim is serves as the Director of Grid Modernization and Technology Integration for North Carolina's electric cooperatives. And in his role, Jim directs grid modernization programs, an effort that involves working with distribution cooperatives to test new and innovative technology at the edge of the grid. He also manages NCEMC's community solar efforts and is helping to develop microgrid and storage projects, including North Carolina Electric Cooperative's first microgrid project on Ocracoke Island. My family and I vacation on Hatteras Island every year, right next to the ferry that goes to Ocracoke, and so we're looking forward to having a chance to visit that microgrid in the future. Jim has over 20 years of diverse industry experience in engineering, planning, operations, rates, and portfolio management. He graduated from California State University Northridge with a BA in geography and earned his MBA from Campbell University. Lisa Poger is representing the North Carolina's fine investor-owned utility, Duke Energy. She joined Duke in 2018 as electric transportation manager for North Carolina to assist electric vehicle program implementation and outreach. And she formerly worked at Advanced Energy, North Carolina, where she managed electric transportation projects and led the North Carolina statewide electric vehicle collaborative, Plug-in North Carolina, which brought together industry supporters and stakeholders to identify and address barriers affecting electric transportation. I would also again welcome Lisa. She represents Duke and has worked for Advanced Energy. Both are valued members of the EPIC Affiliates program. So prior to joining Advanced Energy, Lisa worked at Pacific Gas and Electric Company in Northern California, where she managed emergency demand-side curtailment programs and enrollment for large commercial industrial accounts. So she obviously has tremendous experience in the utility perspective. And of course, I'm the director of the Energy Production Infrastructure Center at UNC Charlotte. If you could move to the next slide, Emmett. And I wanted to just give everyone a very, very brief introduction to who EPIC is. I'm also a professor of electrical and computer engineering, but EPIC is much more than just electrical engineering. We are the North Carolina's electric energy focused research center and a developer of workforce for our valued energy industry in the Carolinas, which Charlotte, we're based in Charlotte, and there's a reason for that. Charlotte is one of the centers of the United States in the electric power industry. Our founding mission was to attract students to an energy career and to make sure that there was a firm pipeline of young people who were excited and trained for a professional career in one of the greatest transformations of the global economy that is ever been attempted, and that's the energy transformation, and in particular, perhaps one of the biggest motivations for the term beneficial electrification, which is decarbonization of the economy. And it's interesting, when I've been a professor for now 27 years, and when I first started, electric power was kind of a very established career path, but not one that many students thought was exciting. Well, that's completely different now. Many of our students want to do something to better society, to better the world, and they realize that being a part of that energy transformation is the way they can do it. So to do that, of course, we have to participate aggressively and comprehensively in research and development for that transformation. And we do that across all of the engineering disciplines at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. So that's why it's the Energy Production and Infrastructure Center, because we involve all aspects of engineering the energy system and the energy economy. Next slide, Emmett. We have very important external partnerships, and this is not by any means a comprehensive one, but it's a list of and kind of grouped in a way that reflects that one of the strengths of the Charlotte area and the Carolinas is in the nuclear energy sector, but by no means exclusively nuclear, because we also know the Carolinas are among the leaders in the country in renewable energy. A number of these industry partners are represented on the EPIC External Advisory Board, which is a critical steering group from industry, which keeps EPIC industry connected. In fact, I've already received a chat from my good friend Tim Fairchild at SAS, which you see on the list here, and who is a member of our external advisory board. Thank you, Tim, for being part of the webinar today. Next slide. So just to kind of scene set for our utility perspective, which Jim and Lisa are well qualified to give us, I wanted to just kind of say, you know, where does this word beneficial, how's it gotten connected with electrification? I think if you were living in the turn of the 20th century, any kind of electrification was beneficial, and crucial things like rural electrification made that a universal a service to tremendous benefit, both in quality of life as well as the economy of the United States. But now we have kind of a different suggestion for what we mean by beneficial. And perhaps the most important connection between beneficial and this energy economy transformation is the drive to decarbonize, to reduce the direct connection between the emission of mostly carbon dioxide and the production of economic growth driven energy production and consumption. So in kind of casting about for a general way of saying why is it that beneficial electrification is important, not just for decarbonizing the vast but minority sector of the total global energy economy, which is electricity. It's important for all of the energy uses for a global economy. And this statement from, which I just saw, as you can see, very recent article in Washington Examiner, a quote attributed to Chris Gold, Chief Innovation and Sustainability Officer at another large investor-owned utility, Exelon, in the Midwest. We understand all paths to economy-wide decarbonization, not just electricity, lead through the electric sector. That's a really important point, and it points to the fact that there's a general expectation that low emission or zero emission primary energy sources are going to be the source of that electricity that allows us to eliminate principally fossil fuel from things like the transportation sector. And Lisa will is well qualified to talk plenty about that. So next slide, please. So, and I'll just finish by saying that air quality and health benefits of transportation electrification are another aspect of beneficial electrification. And I think it's very important to recognize that it's not just about eliminating CO2. There's already established public policy to improve air quality from normal hazards to human health and safety. And so this idea of, for example, electrifying transportation so that we are taking almost exclusive direct conversion of fossil fuel, gasoline or diesel for the most part, into mechanical rotating motion that pushes our cars around, for example, to an energy source delivered principally by the electric grid in our utility industry, to from sources that are increasingly zero emission, nuclear and renewable energy and hydro being the three principal ones. So that of course is going to reduce the direct exposure of fossil fuel burning emissions to the public health, and that's why I adapted the slide from a presentation from Sushma Mazmoor, North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality at an EPIC Energy seminar last year, in which she just reminded us all that those in environmental quality are still concerned about these emissions and reducing their health impacts. So final slide, please, and then I just want to make one very important point here, which is beneficial electrification is about in the modern sense about reducing these emissions, they're not automatically about promoting a particular industry. And this is very, very important. And you can see in this graph here, which is kind of complicated, but it basically shows in the bold red line what is projected to happen in Duke Energy Progress, which is part of the North Carolina Duke Energy, one of the Duke Energy utilities operating companies, in approximately 2024, in which the North Carolina duck curve becomes severe enough where solar energy starts to displace nuclear energy. This would not be a good thing for beneficial electrification, because if we start to displace zero emission energy with zero emission energy, then we're getting out of the linear progress that we want to make with beneficial electrification. So that's why it's very important to not just assume that it is about a particular energy source, but it is about that mix of energy leading to a net reduction in carbon emissions. Okay, so with that, I'd like to invite our next our first panelist to make a presentation, and Jim, I believe you're next.
All right, so thank you very much, Dr. Mazzola. I appreciate that, and also want to thank Research Triangle Clean Tech Cluster for letting us present here, because I always enjoy the opportunity to talk about what we're doing at the co-ops. So I'm going to go ahead and advance that one slide. So I don't know if the folks on the webinar today know who the co-ops are, but I'll give you a little bit of background. There's 26 distribution co-ops in the state. They serve primarily the rural parts of North Carolina. Really, we go from the mountains to the sea. As Mike said, his family was on vacationing on Ocracoke. We serve Ocracoke, or Cape Hatteras. But they, the co-ops have been around since the 30s, when they brought electricity to the rural parts of the state. And we're operating in 93 of the 100 counties. And I work for the statewide organization in Raleigh. So we're the generation and transmission cooperative that serve those members who in turn serve their membership who owns them. So we just recently announced that we have some emissions goals. We're going to try to reduce our 2005 carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. And also we're looking to try to be net zero by 2050. So those are two goals that we just set just here recently. And we're going to be doing that through trying to use innovative resources. We have, we're continuing to, we have some nuclear generation in our portfolio, so, and some renewables. And that's the path that we've charted for the co-ops for the next several years. So we're looking forward to reaching those goals. Next slide, please. So the beneficial, this is NCEMC's, or the co-ops definition of beneficial electrification. There's really 4 components to it. It's not really too much different than what others say is beneficial electrification, but essentially it can save consumers money over time. And it's money for fuel savings, for example. It benefits the environment and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It fosters a more robust and resilient grid. And for us operating on the distribution system, that's really important. As more renewables come on, we want to be able to manage that grid in a resilient way to continue to provide quality service to the membership. And finally, it improves product quality, or the consumer quality of life. And in many cases, beneficial electrification can actually improve the product quality, can reduce impacts to workers. It can improve quality of life locally. So those are the things that we're looking for in technology that satisfies beneficial electrification. The one thing we want to make sure is that we accomplish at least one of those things. Hopefully we can accomplish more than one, but we accomplish one of those things without harming any of the other ones. That's what we're looking for beneficial electrification technology. Go ahead and advance, Emmett. So right now, it's a great time to be talking about beneficial electrification because the grid continues to get cleaner. You can see it in this graphic right here. The green line is the U.S. on average, and the blue line is North and South Carolina. So you can see we're getting cleaner over time. And what that really means is if I installed an electric water heater 5 years ago, it's actually cleaner today than it was 5 years ago because of how clean the grid is getting. And it's because of the integrating renewables onto the grid, using more natural gas, and of course in the Southeast we have a lot of nuclear generation. We actually have a very clean generation mix in the Southeast. And if you think about it, like electric vehicles that are driven in the Southeast compared to maybe ones that are driven in the Midwest, I think ours are probably a little bit cleaner. So it's a great time to be talking about beneficial electrification. Move on to the next one. So in North Carolina at the co-ops, we're focused in 3 areas. The big one is transportation, EVs. It's huge. I think Lisa's going to talk a little bit about that. But we're also focused in agribusiness because we do serve the rural parts of the state. Farmers and food producers are really, they make up a lot of our membership. So we're looking for opportunities in the agribusiness sector. Industrial processes, there's not a lot of industry on our system, but there is some. And we're looking to work with our members to try to find innovative ways to change processes to bring beneficial electrification into those businesses. And we'll talk a little bit about both of those. And of course, residential, Mike mentioned earlier that we have a couple of microgrids, but we also have 2 residential microgrids that we're currently working on. One of them's almost online, one at the coast and one in Wake County. So we're working with builders on integrating technology into homes to make them efficient, to have them pre-wired for electric vehicles, for example. And of course, renewables and batteries and resiliencies, that's part of what we're looking for in the residential space. Go ahead and forward on to the next one. So this is a graphic from EPRI, and Duke Energy and North Carolina Electric Membership Corporation commissioned a study with EPRI it was essentially an electrification study. And you can see on this graph here, by far the biggest opportunity for electrification is EVs. So we started out 2 years ago or so, probably, trying to really drive EVs into the rural parts of the state, which, the rural parts of the state are not going to be loaded with EVs. You're going to see those in Duke's service territory for the most part, but we are getting them. We are getting EVs in the rural parts of the state, and more importantly, the folks that live in the more densely populated parts of the state are typically traveling to co-op service territories for recreation and vacation. So we're very interested in promoting EVs in our service territory. And if you go ahead and move on to the next slide, Emmett. We're doing that promotion through this EV charging network and EV awareness. And you can see on this graphic, this is a graphic of the charging network that the co-ops have put in place throughout the state. There's about 60 chargers throughout the state in co-op service territory, and there's about 100 plugs. So if you're going out to the Outer Banks, or you're going up to the mountains, or anywhere in between, and you're traveling through co-op service territory, and you have an EV, you should be able to hook up. And that's what we're looking for, because it's even a economic development thing for the cooperatives to, for those small businesses that are located in co-op service territory. Folks are coming in from from the larger cities for recreation purposes, we want them to come in and charge their car there, maybe stop at a local shop or restaurant and spend a little time there. That's really important. Another thing that we're doing for awareness is the co-ops are converting their fleets to EVs. Now the line trucks aren't converted yet, although there are some hybrids out there, and there are some bucket trucks that run the buckets off of batteries. But what I'm talking about is the electric vehicle fleets, the cars. I think almost every one of the co-ops has an EV now. Many of them have multiple. There are Chevy Bolts, Leafs, and even some Teslas on the co-op systems. There's been a lot of ride and drive events that the co-ops have hosted, and that is probably the biggest or the most significant way that we can demonstrate beneficial electrification is showing the performance of some of these electric vehicles. There's been guys, kind of these salty old linemen that you would never think would be in an EV. You take them out in a Tesla and you show them the performance, and they become believers pretty quick in the performance of EVs. Those have been very successful. Some of the co-ops have even allowed their EVs to be checked out over the weekend by their members, which has been interesting, and they've had some success with that. I think people really like to get that chance to drive it and experience it for themselves. So EVs have been a big part of beneficial electrification for the co-ops. Going on to the next slide, we can get into some of the other technologies that we're looking at for agribusiness and some of the food processing types of things. So non-road fleets, one of the things we're looking at right now are trying to electrify forklifts and e-trues, which are really interesting. And I'm not sure if you all know what e-trues are, but when you see these semi-trailers that have the refrigeration units on the front, about 30% of those refrigeration units are hybrid units. They're essentially like a shore power plug on a large boat or a ship. When they pull into port, they can plug into the grid, so they don't have to run off of their engines. Same thing with these semi-trailers that have these diesel-powered refrigeration units on the front. In many cases, these trailers are loaded at the distribution center, and they're parked waiting for a semi-truck to come pick them up and haul them to their destination. Well, during that time, they're just idling, and they're just idling, running. And we think it would be great to try to plug those things in, particularly since so many of them have the capability to be hybrids anyways. We're also looking at agriculture. One of the things we're working on right now is we're partnered up with a farmer and an irrigation vendor to change his pump from a diesel to an electric motor. And you may say, well, that's really not a big deal. But what's a big deal about this is it's on a single phase line. So in the rural parts of the state, a lot of those distribution lines are single phase. And single phase lines typically can't carry a very large electric motor. You need three-phase service for that. We're working with a company called Single Phase Power Solutions. They make very large electric motors that are single phase. We're trying to convert this diesel pump to an electric motor, and this is a 200 horsepower diesel engine. And some of the benefits for the farmer is the efficiency of these electric motors are so high compared to the diesels. The diesels are about 35% efficient. The electric motors are 95% efficient. They're quiet. They don't have to bring fuel to them. It's actually something that a lot of farmers are interested in, but it's not really available for them if they're on single phase service. So what we're trying to do with this project is demonstrate this capability of these motors so that hopefully we can get more farmers that are using irrigation systems to switch over. And of course, industrial manufacturing, there's a little bit of that on our system, a lot of food preparation. We've talked to some folks about using electric fryers and boilers, which have more throughput in them and they're more efficient. So those are all areas that we're looking at for beneficial electrification on our system. And let's go to the next one, which I think might be the last. Okay, so I just want to plug Best Solutions. So at the co-ops, we're currently working on this program called Best Solutions. BEST stands for Beneficial Electrification and Sustainable Technologies. And what we're trying to do at the statewide organization is develop a program that our co-ops can adopt, and they can work and partner with their C&I members on beneficial electrification and sustainable technologies. And when I say sustainable technologies, I'm talking about renewable resources. So if they're interested in renewable resources because they have a mandate for one reason or another, either they're supplying a company that requires that of them, or their own personal reasons they want renewables, we want to help them develop those. We want to partner with them. And of course, beneficial electrification is what we've just been discussing. And we're currently in that project development stage. The current COVID crisis has slowed us down a little bit, but we're continuing to use technology and develop it. So that's it for me, guys. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. We had Emmett and I had discussed that you were going to give a definition of beneficial electrification. Thank you very much for laying it out for us. We'll go ahead. There's been some discussions that have been prompted by that on the chat, so we're going to get to that Q&A because some of them I think are really important. But we'd like to get to our second panel member before we take open questions. So Lisa, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. I like being the last presenter, so I don't have to lay out all of the technical details of things. So Jim, thank you so much for outlining what beneficial electrification is. And Dr. Mazzola, just a quick note on the workforce development in the energy industry. My 10-year-old daughter is taking the energy camp through Wake County this week, which is really great to get young kids interested in energy because it's just a space that I think is not available to a lot of kids. So it's great to get an early start on that. So having said that, that was more of a personal kind of side note. But yeah, I'm Lisa Poger with Duke Energy. I've been with Duke Energy since 2018 on transportation electrification, which is somewhat of a new group at Duke. They've been looking at electrification for a long time in various aspects of commercial transportation, different things. The one piece that has kind of moved forward is the transportation component of that. So I'm going to talk about that today. If you can go to the next slide. So as I just mentioned, our focus right now is on transportation. We are a regulated utility through the Public Utilities Commission, so everything we do needs to be approved and stamped off by the commission, which protects the consumers. And so our programs right now are really focusing on the transportation aspect, which is has great returns for the consumer. And we're looking at on-road, off-road, and shared e-mobility because electric transportation doesn't just, it's not just passenger vehicles. It's not your Tesla or your, I drive a Leaf, your passenger vehicles. It also includes a number of community, last mile, kind of like the bird or the scooter, also bus electrification, motorcycles. We're moving into, as Jim was mentioning, some of the anti-idling and long distance truck hauling. And then my favorite kind of thing is the drones that are coming up. So all of that is included under that bucket of electric transportation. Next slide. So this is my personal lawnmower, which I love. So although, you know, at Duke Energy, we're really focused on transportation right now, I think the cooperatives have a little more flexibility in terms of things that they can incentivize and work on. But I purchased this lawnmower, this all-electric lawnmower, cordless, last year, and it is fantastic. So if you have not had an experience with an electric lawnmower, it's quiet, it's light because it's not carrying any fuel. It's really, I hate to say a treat, who likes to mow the lawn, but anyway, it's really fantastic. And so there are a lot of applications for electrification outside of transportation, including, I also just purchased a electric power washer, which I didn't think would have enough oomph to do the job, but it does. And then a colleague of mine has just installed an induction stove, which I had no idea how that operates. I tend to move more toward the crock pot to electrify my cooking in the summer to keep from heating the house through the oven. So just kind of fun applications of electrification outside of transportation. Next slide. So as a utility, what we are looking at from a utility standpoint, we've been providing power for 100 years or so, so we're familiar with the industry, but we see our role in electric vehicles to in four kind of phases: to inform our customers about what the opportunities are, to encourage them to adopt things that will be beneficial for them, both monetarily and also, as Dr. Mazzola mentioned, the human and health and safety aspects of moving from petroleum-based fuels to electricity. So we want to give that information to them so they can make smart decisions. We want to encourage them through incentives or programs. We also demonstrate our commitment to electrification through our fleets, which I'll touch on in just a second. And then a big component of this movement toward passenger vehicle electrification is really providing that foundational infrastructure so people feel comfortable driving electric cars and don't worry that they are going to be stranded somewhere. Next slide. So here's just a picture of some of the fleet vehicles that we have. Currently, Duke Energy has over 500 electric vehicles in our fleet. We have a big initiative this year and next year as part of our climate action plan to move our fleet more to electric. And in addition, as Jim mentioned, kind of moving, utilities are all moving toward this net zero cleaner energy combination. So as we move forward with those programs, it makes the electric vehicles even more environmentally beneficial. But just in this array here, we have all electrics, we have some hybrid plug-in electrics, and then we have bucket trucks that have been retrofitted to run anti-idling technology. So when they're stationary, they can run off a battery and not have to be running the engine, which is a couple benefits to that is the air quality benefits and also the safety, because you're not running a motor and you can hear the other workers. So there are a lot of unexpected benefits from electrifying those bucket trucks. Next slide. So some of our success stories over the last few years. In 2016, we had a limited funding opportunity for a number of electrification projects. A big one was the public level 2 charging. We installed, or we rebated for installation almost 200 level 2 public charging stations through municipalities and nonprofit organizations. And so that had been a very successful program. We had enrollment way beyond the capacity that we could fund, but I think everyone was really happy with that, and most of those municipalities are offering that public level 2 charging at a free charging or instance at the location. So that has been a really good stimulation for public charging and for vehicle adoption, and we feel that that has really helped the numbers of vehicle registrations in the state. In addition to that, part of that program also included a electric transit bus fueling infrastructure grant, and we are funding We have funded, I think, 5 now transit agencies. I'll talk about one in just a second, very briefly, because I know we're running out of time. And then the third category is that anti-idling infrastructure. And that kind of combines both truck stop electrification, which is when drivers need to stay, do their downtime, they can have air conditioning and power availability without having to run their motors. And then another component of that is, as Jim mentioned, the refrigerated truck units and having that shore power where they could be idling, for hours while they're loading or while they're staging. And so there's a really big savings there to have. Next slide. So just highlights on those 3 kind of programs. GoTriangle is a really great example. Duke Energy funded the charging stations, 2 charging stations for their electric buses that they were able to acquire through a federal transit agency grant, the No-Low grant. And so the charging infrastructure can be fairly expensive as it is a higher power output. There's a lot of pre-work to do with that for the electric delivery. So, so we were able to partner with them on their Low-No grant to provide the infrastructure for them. And you can see here that we also have worked with them on putting a logo on the buses to say powered by Duke Energy. So that's been a very exciting project. Next slide. And as far as truck stop electrification, we just last week got the permits approved for a project in Charlotte, North Carolina, at a Schneider fleet truck lot, where they can pull in and they have that air conditioning unit and power outlets so they can power their devices and things like that at the facility. And you can see there, I don't know if that's really clear on the screen, but you can see that the CO2 reductions are significant for them while they are there getting their DOT required rest, that they don't have to run the air conditioning and all of the auxiliary power. They can do that from the ports at this location. So we're seeing some really great impacts in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction, CO2 reductions, a little bit of NOx, and particulates as well. So that we feel this is a really great, significant project. Next slide. And then the refrigerated truck units, I didn't put the name on here of who the provider is. We haven't yet announced that. They have just wrapped up converting their trucking fleet to refrigerated units that can use shore power. And so some of the calculations that we did is that they're going to save over 100 gallons of diesel a day, which will, if they're using, they will idle at this location. They are either staged or parked for loading for about 6 hours a day. And so they will increase their electricity usage, obviously, to about 1,100 kilowatt hours per day, but their savings per day, assuming various things, I know diesel and gasoline is maybe less than $2 right now, but just using these assumptions, they save a pretty significant amount over the course of the year. So about $70,000 a year just in fuel cost savings. And then when you factor in some of the maintenance and reduction of the motor run time and what maintenance needs to occur there, there's obviously some additional savings there as well. Next slide. And then finally, just in terms of like what we're doing moving forward. So those are programs that were under a limited funding opportunity that's wrapping up actually in the next month or so. And so we're seeing some really great impacts on that. So we want to build on all of that. But in terms of foundational infrastructure, Duke Energy serves 6 states, and we have pilot programs in each of the states. But if you look in the upper right-hand corner, that's North Carolina. We have a program that is under review by the Utilities Commission that was filed back in March of 2019 that will look at residential charging infrastructure to understand if there's a demand response component that is available there. Fleet rebates, which fleets are the new gold. I don't know what the term might be, but fleets are on everyone's mind. And so we have a fleet component to that for a rebate for charging infrastructure. And then we're also looking at electrifying school buses and more transit buses, because we feel like those are the really low-hanging fruit in terms of emissions reductions. And then just building out that public network of DC fast charging so consumers can have more of a gas station-ish kind of experience and not have to spend 2 or 3 hours. They can spend 30 minutes to refuel when they're doing cross-state or state-to-state travel. And next slide, I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you, Lisa. And you and I share something in common. We both drive a Leaf, and I love it. It's a perfect example of how all electric, pure electric vehicles already have a technology that is mature enough to perform what I call the dense suburban or urban personal transportation mission perfectly. In fact, better, because it's cheaper and zero emission, and is on the grid edge of decarbonization if the energy mix becomes less carbon intensive. At this point, we have a healthy discussion going on. In fact, we've had a few of our attendees answering questions of a few of our attendees. So that's really great. That shows the strength of the energy community that is part of the webinar right now. I think Emmett has charged me with maybe posing some questions to our panelists. And there's a couple questions that are directed at specific panelists. I'll go ahead and hit those first, and then take on another really important thread that came up concerning whether all electrification of end uses is actually beneficial or not. So let's see, let me get the last one. We have and I'm going to answer a question for Epic right quick, which is, does Epic offer an energy camp? And the answer is not for the age kids that Lisa mentioned, because we're focused on professional education of engineers. But we have many young kids, and I'm sure there's students that come through our building, Energy Production Infrastructure Center, in normal summers, and this is not a normal one, and they are part of some other camp that makes a stop at Epic, and they get a little bit of insight from it. We did run a very successful energy boot camp for our engineering students, and I couldn't believe it, but it was sold out even though it was right after final exam. So we do some of that, but principally in our workforce development is focused on engineers to be. Okay, so Jim, we got a question for you. It says, public power utilities in the eastern half of North Carolina pay very high peak costs. Does the same apply to cooperatives? EVs can add a lot to peak costs. What is NCEMC's approach to EV load management?
Yeah, so we have demand charges that we try to manage, and EVs can add to those, but at this point, the last thing we want to do is we're trying to encourage EVs. We don't want to irritate folks that own them. So what we've done, several of the co-ops have done, is they've developed EV rates to essentially encourage charging at times when it won't impact our demand charges. And some of those EV rates are quite low. It's really, I do not have an EV, although I do have an electric weed whacker that I love. If I had an EV, I would definitely be on that rate, because it is really, you can save quite a bit of money on it. So that's how we're managing it at this point. We've talked about demand response on how you could integrate it in with charging, but it's something that we'll tackle, I think, maybe down the road, but not at this point. I hope that answers Gary's question.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I definitely two-rate structure. I'm in Duke territory, but I'll be in touch with Lisa about that afterwards. Question?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, if I could just add on to that really quickly.
Sure.
We are looking at that as part of our pilot program, looking at residential and workplace and transit and public charging, trying to understand what those loads are. That is part of our process, is to understand those demands better so we can offer those kind of prescriptive rates that will allow charging to occur without having those high demand charges. I know in California that's a huge problem.
Great. All right, so question, while you're on, Lisa, I got a question directed to you, and since it's a little bit personalized, I'll let everyone know who asked it. It's Tim Fairchild. He says, Lang Reynolds schooled me on EV adoption a couple of years ago and highlighted the challenge of the electrification of fleets. For example, if a customer like US Foods went all electric with their fleet, their load profile would change dramatically and perhaps very quickly. Have you seen this type of rapid and large-scale electrification?
Yeah, I think that's one of, that's a great question. And it's something that we are kind of talking with companies and municipalities about, looking at their rate schedules for their different facilities. I think when we move into fleets, especially into the medium and heavy duty, we're going to have to look at what the service level is for that facility. And so we are really bringing on our engineering teams and our account managers to better understand what those rate schedules need to be and how we can communicate the impacts of those additional loads on a facility. So it's something that we're very aware of, and it's something that we want to try to understand a little bit better with our pilot program, so we can roll out some programs that will be beneficial to all customers going forward.
Thank you, Lisa. And Jim, if you have anything to add on that, jump in.
No. Good. I don't.
Okay, great. All right, so because Emmett has briefed us that we're to expect his closing remarks at about 2:59, and we're at 2:54 now, I'd like to pose maybe one more major question that came out during your presentations, in which there were some examples of in-use electrification. A weed whacker was an example, or an electric edger was an example. And the question was, if I use an electric edger, am I actually participating in beneficial electrification if that's defined by decarbonization? And so there was kind of a spirited discussion about that. And I remember a number of years ago, earlier this decade, in fact, there was a major announcement from the Sierra Club, joined with the Electric Power Research Institute, basically aligning with the idea that electrification of transportation, at least, would produce a net reduction in CO2 emission, even if the mix of electricity generation was still involved significant amounts of fossil fuel consumption. So that was a very that's a point to make, that it's not automatic that transportation electrification, for example, will lead to CO2 reduction, but it's generally acknowledged that with other trends included, such as decarbonizing the electric power industry, that we should get there. So what is your take on the idea that if anyone converts their gizmo from a gas burner to an electric powered system, that we can tell them that yes, they're participating in beneficial electrification?
So my own personal perspective with my weed whacker, if you go by the definition that we have at NCEMC, there's no question that it's beneficial electrification, because of my productivity level has increased so much because I don't have to fight with the weed whacker anymore to get it started. That's probably the primary benefit for me, but it is, there's no question that there's savings because of the fuel and the oil that you would mix in the weed whacker versus paying 11 cents at the plug. It's definitely beneficial in that regard. I know there is zero emissions coming out of my weed whacker. The emissions that are produced in the fuel mix in North Carolina, in this region, that are providing the electrons to that I have never studied the output of my old weed whacker, but I can guarantee you there's less emissions. Those units are scrubbed that if they do have fossil fuel powered, and my weed whacker was not scrubbed. So that's just my own personal take on it.
Thanks, Jim. Lisa?
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to comment on that. It reminds me of a commercial I saw a long time ago that with a gas-powered coffee maker and alarm clock that was inside. I think that the health impacts clearly favor having electric devices that do not have point source emissions. Yeah, and you can argue, extending the tailpipe or whatever, but that applies to your refrigerator, your air conditioning, any appliance that we use that plugs into an outlet is really extending the tailpipe, so to speak. Yeah, I think in terms of, I think that's all beneficial electrification. Anytime you can avoid burning a fossil fuel to power something that you're using benefits everyone, because it's a lot easier to control emissions from a point source than it is for millions of leaf blowers. Like my neighbor loves to chase leaves around his yard for hours and hours with a gas-powered leaf blower, and it's just very frustrating to not have that be electric.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, not to mention the noise. You make actually a very important point, because the EPA regulates small engines at a different so-called tier level. And companies like the electric membership corporations or Duke Energy are regulated in a much more stringent way with respect to their internal combustion engines or any consumption of fossil fuels. So great point. One last question before Emmett jumps in here. When a homeowner buys an EV and installs a charging station at home, is it helpful for the homeowner to let the utility know their new purchase? Does that matter? Jim?
Absolutely, yes. I'm sure Lisa can add a lot more to that, but we really like to know that so we can understand what's going on with loads and make sure that the service is adequate for the home.
Well, how would you let them know?
As a homeowner?
Yeah.
Well, I don't work for a distribution utility. I need to ask our guys, but I don't know, Lisa. How do they let you guys know? Do they ask for EV chargers, EV charging rates?
Well, we don't actually offer an EV charging rate at this point. We are evaluating that, but yeah, it would have to be on the customer. We send out a lot of communications, asking for input, and so it would be us asking them to let us know. But I definitely think that it is very valuable to know that an EV has been added to a home load for a couple of reasons. One, it adds about 30% to the residential home if you're driving just even an average range. But of course, we're not all driving that far these days. But it's about 30% addition to your annual load. And so that's important for the company to know in terms of forecasting and planning. But also, we at Duke Energy, we have, we do a lot of analysis on for energy efficiency. And so I personally get my home report, and I have 2 electric vehicles, so I look like I'm a really bad neighbor because my energy use is really high, and they don't have a caveat for electric vehicles in their analysis. So we've been working on that to try to fit that into the My Home report from Duke Energy. But yeah, it's definitely better to know, and I think that we do need a better way to allow consumers to self-identify through the utility.
Well, thank you, Lisa. That great answer, both Jim and Lisa. And the way I address that issue of being the bad apple on the energy usage in the neighborhood is I try to stick that bill to my employer, University of North Carolina, Charlotte, which allows me to charge in the parking garage. And so they get most of that from me.
Smart man.
Emmett?
Yes, well, thank you all so much. For those of you who are stuck around, we appreciate it. Give our panelists a virtual round of applause, if you will. I really could tell there's a lot of thought going into how beneficial electricity, how the utilities can, focus in on and deploy more beneficial electricity technologies and help us drive decarbonization. And so we appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Mazzola. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Lisa. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.